Okay, so now Dr. Bridget Heelan is going to speak to us. Her talk is The Science of Vegetarianism and Food Regimen Throughout the Lifecourse, -9 to 100. Bridget herself is, previously she was a medical consultant in immunology, so she's an immunologist. She's worked in research and she has a PhD in science from Oxford University. She's also worked in the UK as a medical regulator, and currently she's an advisor to academics and to pharmaceutical companies in connection with regulatory authorities in Europe and America, so regulation. So that's a brief introduction to Bridget, and now we're going to place this near the microphone so that it will go through the sound system. Bridget, good luck with your talk. We look forward to listening to what you have to say.
Thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you to the organisers for giving me the opportunity to speak to you on this topic. Because of my background, I picked a particular area of vegetarianism that relates to medical health. So I'm going to go through this and welcome questions throughout. So I want to talk about something specific, so that refers to microorganisms. However, the studies looking at the bugs in the gut often use the genetics, of course, so they often use the microbiome. And so in publications relating to this, it's often used sort of interchangeably. So it doesn't really matter because you're basically reflecting the organisms in the gut when you talk about the microbiome and referring to the microbiota. It's incredible that we have 100 trillion microorganisms in the GI tract. We have so many microorganisms. Most of them are bacteria, but we've also got organisms like viruses and fungi. The human genome has about 23,000 genes. So if you take the cell from a human body, each cell will have about 23,000 genes, whereas the microbiome, which incorporates these 100 trillion microorganisms, encodes over 3 million genes, producing thousands of different things, which we call metabolites. And these metabolites replace many of the functions of the host. So we are the host, the human body is the host to these gut microbiota. Moving on to the next slide to try and give you an idea, and obviously this is best read when you have time, but you can see here a picture of the various parts of the gastrointestinal tract, and looking at the typical range of organisms, the most commonly found organisms in each area. You can see that the oral cavity, the mouth has quite a lot of organisms, the esophagus, as we go down, the stomach, and the small intestine. And it is the large intestine which is of particular importance in the gut microbiota. All of it, but for the normal sort of processes, the heaviest contamination or the heaviest number of organisms is in the large intestine. One important thing about the microbes, or the bugs in the gut, is the diversity. So that's a measure of how many different species there are. And so diversity is very important. You do not want to have a limited diversity of microorganisms in the gut. Lower diversity, so a smaller range of organisms, is a marker of what's called dysbiosis. It's an imbalance. So an imbalance in the organisms in the gut is a bad thing, generally, and it is associated with a lot of disease. So, for example, autoimmune disease, where the body reacts against itself, it attacks the self-tissues. Obesity, so being very overweight, is associated with dysbiosis. In other words, a contraction in the diversity of the organisms in the gut. And very importantly, cardiometabolic conditions. So when we say cardiometabolic, we're talking about diabetes, putting a lot of weight on around the waist area, associated with increased risk of diabetes, high lipids in the blood, so high cholesterol, and of course high blood pressure and heart attacks. So that's cardiometabolic conditions. And interestingly, as we age, the diversity of the gut microbiome contracts. So a normal part of aging is that this very complex system within the gut tends to get less diverse. And so some measure of dysbiosis is a feature of normal aging. What do all these bugs do? So we have millions of them, trillions of them. What do they do? Well, it plays a vital role in human biology. And diet, coming back to the vegetarianism, is a major modulator. So you can imagine diet is impacting significantly on what is happening into our gut microbiomes. A key function of these bacteria is that they're busy, they work, they're fermenting carbohydrates. So carbohydrates are complex sugars in the colon. The colon is the large intestine. They produce things as a result of this fermentation. So if you feed the gut microbiome with the microbiota with complex carbohydrates that reach the large intestine, they produce good things, such as short-chain fatty acids, which are very good for the whole body, including the gut, and other things that are related to health benefits, which are too detailed to go into. But the general message is, if you feed these things right, they do you a lot of good. By having a very diverse microbiota, you prevent colonization by pathogens. So when we get gastroenteritis or infections of the gut, that is prevented largely, a lot of the time, because we're already full of microbiomes. These bugs produce vitamin K, B9, and B2, which is essential to health. There is also a role for these bacteria in what's called the gut-brain axis. The gut itself is a large immune organ. And the connectivity between the gut and the brain, I'll come to later in the talk. But it is reliant on the microbiota. So providing nutrients for the gut microbiota that produce useful products for the body can be addressed through diet. If we look at this representation of the role of the gut microbiota in health and disease, on the left-hand side, here in the middle, there's a picture of a large bowel. On the left-hand side, and in red, we have all the bad things of a contracted or abnormal microbiota. So you can see this, it's when the bacteria diversity is reduced, there are productions, these bacteria produce bad things for us. They produce things that cause inflammation in the gut and in the vessels in general. Eating too much protein is a cause of this, and that's more common in non-vegetarian diets. And saturated fatty acid intake is another complication that happens with non-vegetarian diets, because these are typically from animal sources. If we look on the right side of the diagram, you can see that here you have an example of what's good if the gut has the good microbiota. You can see it lowers gut inflammation and it increases insulin sensitivity. By increasing insulin sensitivity, you have less chance of getting diabetes or cardiovascular disease. As mentioned before, it produces good things which affect the body if you have the right gut microbiome. It's been shown that long-term weight gain over 10 years correlates with diversity of the microbiome. And it is exacerbated, weight increase is exacerbated with low fiber intake. Low dietary fiber intake is something that really is not a problem for vegetarians. Lower bacterial diversity has been observed multiple times, repeatedly, in people with inflammatory bowel disease and a variety of other diseases, including diabetes. Antibiotics and foods obviously impact on this. And the gut microbiota, because of the things it produces as a result of being fed properly, influences many areas of health, particularly immunity and energy. So targeting the gut microbiota with probiotics or dietary fibers, which I'll explain the probiotics soon, benefits human health and could potentially reduce obesity. So it's a crucial area of medicine that hasn't really been at the forefront of at least Western medicine. So, what's the evidence that a vegetarian food will affect the gut microbiota? Well, prebiotic carbohydrates is key. So prebiotic carbohydrates are carbohydrates that are selectively found and in vegetarian food and are utilized by good microorganisms in the gut. So various vegetables have a lot of carbohydrates that are not absorbed quickly and that reach the large intestine in a relatively undigested form, where the gut microbiota can metabolize them and produce good products that help the overall health. In contrast to the beneficial effect of fiber fermentation, fermentation of amino acids, which is typically rich in non-vegetarian diets, results in bad compounds being produced, increasing the inflammation in the bowel and increasing the risk of colon cancer. So cancer of the bowel is well known to be associated with intake of highly processed meat products, for example. So that ties back to the disadvantages of being an omnivore. Because of the role of dietary fiber and plant-based foods to inhibit the bad effects of amino acids, there's a very good rationale for remaining vegetarian and improve gut health, because in part of their impact on the gut microbiome. Fascinatingly, and the references are at the bottom of these slides, the diversity of the gut microbiota and the composition of it can even have a positive impact on exercise, because the gut and the brain talk to each other. And if the gut is in a very good place, producing the right things from the microbiome, the high that one gets with exercise is improved. So I thought that was very interesting. So many diverse effects from a good vegetarian diet. Some more information on the impact of vegetarian diet. It establishes a diverse and stable microbiome. And that's the key. You need it as diverse as possible, and ideally you want it to be stable. The microbiome-derived metabolites, that is what the bugs produce, are known to be abundant in vegetarian diets. So vegetarian diets really help to establish a diverse and stable microbiome. And it's important in that they affect the intestinal immune responses, maintain the barrier function of the gut, and protect against pathogens. So vegetarians will have all of these advantages. Compared to omnivores, in general, across the world, vegetarians have a lower body mass index, which is good, lower cholesterol, reduced incidence of diabetes, and lower blood pressure. And all of these can be traced back, at least in part. I'm not saying the gut microbiome explains all these things. It's just that it has an impact on all these things that is going in the positive direction with a vegetarian diet. Increased intake of plant-derived nutrients with their dietary fibers and antioxidants is related to a lower cardiometabolic risk and other chronic diseases. Certainly, I know you've heard about the diet from previous speakers, and a well-planned vegetarian diet gives significant health benefits, and that's well recognized. They maintain the gut microbiome in a diverse way. And vegetarian diets sharply contrast to omnivore diets because they contain fewer ultra-processed foods. Ultra-processed foods, like fast foods, are characterized by immediate absorption almost. They're almost gone by the time the food has travelled down into the small intestine. Therefore, there's nothing left for the very little of that food reaches the large intestine. And therefore, nutrients consumed, in contrast, nutrients consumed in a vegetarian diet with non-digestible carbohydrates for the human reach the large bowel intact and are used by the microorganisms in the colon. And that's what improves health overall. Now, because the title of the talk is -9 to 100, let's have a quick look at the effect on the gut microbiota of vegetarianism at the different stages of life. It's the most important stage of life, one can argue clearly, is the pregnant mother. And regulating the gut microbiota is beneficial, of course, to the health of the mother and therefore the unborn child. Many complications during pregnancy have been associated with abnormalities in the gut microbiome, such as gestational diabetes, obesity, preeclampsia, digestive disorders, and autoimmune disease. So in pregnancy, this is very important because these diseases will affect both of the individuals involved. Early life, after being born, is a critical time for the neonatal gut. That's in the first sort of month or so. The neonatal gut will be progressively populated with different bacterial species that collectively promote a growth maturation. A fully developed and healthy gut microbiome in neonates is important for their development and other aspects of health. And if we think, it's important that babies don't get gastrointestinal infections, it's important they don't get inflammatory disease. And the neonate gut microbiota is impacted by the mothers. So that's important. So the optimal gut microbiome in the mother will help to ensure that the baby develops a good microbiome and promote gut maturation. While the neonatal gut microbiome changes dramatically, of course, in the first month or so, once you get past that stage and into adults and middle life, it's relatively stable for each individual. It is different between each individual, but it's relatively stable. So that really points to the importance of getting it right early on. As I mentioned in passing briefly, aging is associated with a decline in the diversity of the gut microbiota. So that's not great, but it's just part of aging. And if we look at the gut microbiome in aging patterns, you can see on the left-hand side, the blue line is the regular microbiome aging. So as we age on the x-axis at the bottom, our microbiome ages as well. And you can see that the years are correlating. So by the time I get to 60, chronologically, my gut microbiome should be at that age. Unfortunately, for the red line on the left-hand side, some people have an accelerated microbiome aging. In other words, the diversity is contracting faster than the age of the individual. So for example, here, if we look at the x-axis, if I'm 40 and I've got accelerated premature microbiome aging, my microbiome might be the same as somebody who's 80 years of age. And that is not good. The other way you can age your microbiome is, of course, to reduce the diversity of the organisms within it. So typically, premature microbiome aging would be associated with a non-vegetarian diet. And, of course, the associated diseases that go with overfeeding of a non-vegetarian diet. On the right-hand side, you've got a sort of a pictorial representation of, if we look at the regular microbiome aging, it's the three circles on the top. At the young end of the stage, or middle age, you can see there's a mixture of red and blue, but the ratio of the red increases as you get old. Now, that's just a pictorial representation of a reduced diversity. If we look at the line underneath, the premature microbiome aging, you can see that that's extremely bad because the diversity is even less. And we've just talked about the importance of maintaining a diverse microbiome that protects the host. But none of these things are fixed in stone, and not making things worse, i.e. eating a non-vegetarian diet and making things as good as they can be by sticking to a vegetarian diet, should help to stop any premature microbiome aging, and therefore health in older age, over 60, should be helped with a vegetarian diet. So, in conclusion, the gut microbiota constitute a central part of gut and systemic health. A broad diversity of bacteria are capable of reducing both local in the gut and systemic inflammation. And a broad diversity is optimal for health. Feeding the right organisms in the gut microbiota, within the gut, through a diet rich in fiber that reaches the large intestine undigested, and prebiotics, which is what that is, and some other chemicals, is associated with better health outcomes. And that's vegetarianism, whereas a less diverse micropopulation is associated with multiple illnesses. The important thing is that modification of the gut microbiota is possible through diet, and vegetarian diets that are rich in probiotics and fibers enable the growth of optimal gut microbiota. And these factors apply through all stages of the life course. So I'd like to thank you, and I'm welcoming any questions on that presentation. I hope it wasn't too technical for you. Thank you.
Okay, Bridget, I'm just pulling the phone away from the microphone. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Oh, that's great. That was a really splendid presentation and very clear. Yeah, so it was a very clear presentation and excellent diagrams and clear description of things. So I don't know whether anyone would like to ask any question. Maybe Rudra? Okay, Mahendra Bhai is with us. Mahendra Bhai Chotalia, he's been with us through the 3 days. And he's very interested in this topic, so I'll just pass him over. 1 second.
Thank you, madam, for such illuminating talk, and even your slides, they are really explaining everything. I had a great interest in this topic. I heard about the book about this microbiome, which came before, I think, before 5 years or so. I have 2-3 things to talk about. I would like to know. I am not an expert, but I'm really curious about something. One thing is that non-veg food creates, it is habit forming, they say. Once you start eating, it forms habit. What can be a reason for that? That once they start eating, our young lads here, then they can't avoid it. I have other questions also. Should I tell all of them together, or one by one we will take?
The line isn't so clear. Could you just repeat the question, please?
Yeah, very interesting question. And he's been so Mahendra Bhai is asking the question, and he's mentioned that he's very interested in this topic himself, and he read one book which was published some years ago, but he looked at it about 5 years back. And he explored this topic, and he has some questions that come from that. So I'll give him again to the phone.
Hello, am I clear? Am I clear?
You're clear right now. You're very clear now.
Good, I'll be clear.
Thank you. That non-veg food is habit forming. That is my habit forming.
The more you eat, the more you want.
The more you eat, then you cannot avoid it. So here in India, those who are vegetarian, they are turning themselves into non-veg food eaters, and they can't avoid it then. They often visit non-veg restaurant and eat it. Now what is that in non-veg that they can't avoid it?
So Mahendra Bhai is here with me. He wants to ask 2 or 3 questions actually, but to begin with, just to mention that Mahendra Bhai has had a very keen interest in this subject which you presented for a number of years, and he read a book about 5 years back that was dealing with the same themes and the same issues that you presented. So he had one question first, which is that can you explain why people who are historically having a vegetarian diet, somehow come in contact with meat through whatever situation, maybe they're out with their friends and they take a burger, and then after that they get a sort of an addiction to it, and they feel like they have to have more and more. He wants to know the reason why that's happening.
Yeah. I did talk, I'm sorry you missed it all, but basically I think that's the fast food. So it's not like they were given
It's fast food.
a lump of meat. It's
Okay.
the fast food problem. So fast food is designed to be addictive with a high sugar hit, immediate satiation. So you get this high, you feel a buzz after eating, lots of sugar. It's all absorbed early on in the gut. And so you get this sugar release, which is very high. And then following that, you get a real drop. And so therefore you really desire that hit again. It's been designed to be addictive, fast food. That's not, yeah.
That's interesting.
I don't think it's, I don't know, but I can't see, you can't see that happening to people who are offered, say for example, a piece of meat, a simple piece of meat. They don't become addicted to it. I've not met anybody who's become addicted to meat. It's the fast food industry, which is full of chemicals, full of immediate energy release, really bad for your gut microbiome, and it's endemic, and it has gone hand in hand with the rise of obesity throughout the world. The availability of various fast food outlets. So I think it is that effect. And that is all of the bad things in one. So a very high sugar hit, increasing body weight, reducing energy, giving cravings, all of the bad things. Because I'm sure you've heard earlier on, food is your medicine. So to take those medicines is bad. Mm-hmm.
Very, very interesting, Bridget. So basically you're saying it's not having a piece of meat as such that's creating this kind of addiction that people seem to have, but rather the sugar hit from the fast food eating that they're doing. Mm-hmm. So that's an interesting point. Yeah. So maybe we have another question.
I think it's the sugar and the fat, actually.
The sugar and the fat
there's a few. Yeah, because those things are very low in a standard proper diet, right? And biologically, we've been designed throughout the ages to, if we get that high energy rich food, we gorge ourselves on it because we may not have it again for a year. The problem nowadays is you just go to the shop and buy it. And so we haven't evolved, as it were. Mm-hmm. All right, sorry, I got cut out because the Zoom meeting closed. Sorry.
Exactly.
So
you're
basically, very good. I'm back in, and I'm only on the phone, so I think it's probably going to be a clearer line. Okay. There's no truth to that, but I can understand how they use that rationale, particularly when it's time limited. So they're using that rationale to say, well, to make muscle, you need amino acids, and you need them quickly from the diet. In one of my slides, it's shown that a high protein intake actually reduces the diversity of the microbiome. And if we look, there are many, many millions probably of athletes and bodybuilders who are vegetarian. Yeah. So I don't understand how that argument to say you have to have a very high protein diet works, but it has been marketed very successfully. And there is no doubt, and there's no doubt about it. Well, it's the calories. So certainly if you want to put on weight and you take high protein diets, which can be vegetarian, they can be made from whey, you definitely will put on weight. Whether that's what the athlete needs or wants is a different issue. So there is no justification for that, but it is used. And people like selling their high protein drinks. So yeah.
Good answer, Bridget. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. It was nicely explained. Now, something about information. It is said that the vegetarian food, the most important and most beneficial vegetarian foods are oats and algae, the moss. Is it true?
I don't think so. I mean, they may have particular properties that have been studied well and are particularly useful for certain aspects that the investigators were looking for. But, I've seen papers on the benefits of mushrooms, on the benefits of something derived from carrots, on the microbiome. So I think eat the rainbow is the best way to do it. You eat lots of a range. That's the point about a vegetarian diet. It has to be careful. You can't live on potatoes like the Irish do. It's not good for you. You're not in great shape. You have to eat a range of a diverse, because remember, there's millions and millions of these bugs there, and each of them will ferment different carbohydrates and produce different good things and maybe bad things too, right? And you want the balance to be in favor of the good things, meaning unfermented carbohydrates and probiotics from a varied vegetarian diet makes its way into the large bowel to promote the growth of this microbiome. And also, it's important to remember that not all of the microbiome is a goodie, right? It's the balance of them. It's the balance of it. Yeah. So I wouldn't agree to have any restricted diet. You see some very sick patients who get very ill as a result of an extremely restricted vegetarian diet. And so I think diversity, having a rainbow type plate is the best way to go.
Very true. And lastly, I have also witnessed a debate where a group of doctors, they disagree with this idea that the whole body is a microbe. They say that we have so many other lot of things, and considering the whole body as a microbiome is not okay. Is there a such debate in England or somewhere else also?
Well, even, many years ago, the number of organism size is very, very tiny compared to a human cell size, right? And so if you count the numbers of human cells in our body and the numbers of organisms in and on our bodies, the organisms win on a number level. But there's no way everything is a symbiosis in nature. Humans are humans. So, for example, if somebody is in hospital and they've had broad spectrum antibiotics and antifungals and antivirals because they've had, for example, a bone marrow transplant, there's almost no organisms on them or in them, but that doesn't change the person. But I think the harmony between us and what we host, as it were, the bugs on and in us, is important to be aware of. And I think this is an area that's going to be very exciting. Even now, you can buy probiotic milk drinks, for example. And this is a big thing nowadays. It helps your immune system, it helps your cholesterol. These are the claims being made. Not hard scientific evidence, to be fair, but enough to sell them over the counter. The other issue is, for example, if you look at somebody who's got a particularly nasty condition, Clostridium, it's Clostridium, an overgrowth of that particular bug, people are taking transplants of fecal tissue from healthy donors and putting it in to attempt to replace. It sounds very prehistoric, if you like, but in fact it works. It works while it sounds awful, but then transplantation it does sound quite brutal, as it were, but this does work. And so they're trying to develop different should we say different more clinical preparations of the microbiome, but it's ridiculously difficult because we've talked about the millions of them, and that balance that you need is it's an area of research, but a very important one, I think.
So, what we should understand is the cell biology and the microbiology should go together hand in hand, and then treat people like that.
Absolutely, and the vegetarian. One of the things. If we take antibiotics, we can transiently destroy our gut microbiome. We get rid of a lot of them, right? But not all of them. And that's what, and so diet, reinstituting your normal vegetarian diet, it will come back to base. It will, for each individual, tend to be get back to the same place. Because it's not that the bugs just interact with us, we interact with them, our cells interact with them, and of course, most modifiably, our diet interacts with them. And if we have the right diet, we feed them correctly.
Okay. Thanks a lot. We enjoyed the company.
Pleasure.
Company of our husband here.
Yeah.
He's a very nice guy. And
He means me.
thanks.
Great.
Nice
Thank you for the excellent questions. Great
By
talking
himself,
to you.
you know,
Great talking to you.
he's
Thank
had
you.
so many prestigious posts, and he's got such a hugely strong academic background. But we also have a student here at the Tapawan now, Rudra, and he's a very intelligent student, and he's interested in science as well. He's been listening to your talk with interest, so he'd like to ask a question.
Great.
Okay, so can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Yes.
Yeah, so my question is that is microbiota impacts the body of non-vegetarian people? If no, why it is getting complicated to them to solve them?
Are you saying, does the microbiota affect non-vegetarian people?
Yeah.
Is that the question?
Yeah.
Yes, of course. So basically, the microbiota is affected by what we eat. And so non-vegetarian people, and particularly non-vegetarians who eat processed food, have a much less diverse microbiome than vegetarians do. And the much less diverse microbiome is associated with gut inflammation, obesity. It doesn't mean it's the actual cause of obesity, it's associated with it, right? Eating the fast foods and the meats are associated with obesity because there's too many calories absorbed too quickly. So yes, the microbiome is extremely important in meat eaters, and it is different to the microbiome of a vegetarian. So the vegetarian has a much better microbiome than a meat eater, particularly a meat eater who eats fast food. And so therefore that's why you say, well, we can't say it's causative, but we can see that in the more limited microbiome of a meat eater, the chemicals produced by the different ratio of organisms in the gut of a meat eater create inflammatory byproducts, causing gut inflammation. And that's why we know the association of processed meats and so on with an increased risk for cancer. So we can't say it's the only cause, but it's certainly a contributory factor. So yes. Mm-hmm.
Very interesting. I also. We have another. We're okay for 10 minutes.
Yeah. So
One more question, Bridget, from Rudra.
Thank you. Yes.
So what did you think about the transplantation is good for the human body or not?
No.
Because a lot of people are doing transplantations in the older age.
Yeah, so his question is about transplantation, actually. And people in older age, he's saying sometimes are getting transplantation done. Is it good or bad? That's the question, isn't it?
Are you talking about fecal transplantation, or are you talking about organ transplantation or bone marrow? What are we talking about here?
He's talking about general
organ transplant.
Yeah.
No. I don't see the problem with organ transplant at all. If a patient, regardless, you've seen on one of the slides that people at the age of 60 could have a very young microbiome and they might be physically in good condition, whereas people at 60 might be in very poor condition. So basically, if you need, say, for example, a kidney transplant, and that's the only treatment left for you, and you are strong enough and good enough physically to have it, and you agree to it, then you know, if you agree with your doctors and your doctors think you should get it, you should get it. Now, clearly, you're not going to transplant somebody who is very, very unlikely to make it through the procedure or who will likely die as a result of the treatments required. So you wouldn't give it to somebody who has no chance or very, very low chance of making it. But if somebody is in good condition, almost regardless of their age, I think, you know, transplanting somebody in their 90s would probably not be something that would be done, or even perhaps in the 80s. I mean, the cutoff for bone marrow transplants was something like 45 or 50 some years ago. But it's increasing as people seem to be doing better for longer. But I think it's an individual decision. But I mean, realistically, if I was a doctor and I had lungs to give to patients and I had 50 patients on my waiting list, instinctively you would give it to the person that has the best chance of accepting that tissue and living a life. And age does come into it. Of course it does. If you have a 20-year-old and a 70-year-old, you're going to transplant the 20-year-old. So, but I can't say right or wrong it's a bit binary for these things, It's I wouldn't be, yeah. It's a bit more subtle, yeah.
Do you have another question?
No. Thank you.
Thank you, Bridget. There's one more question coming now from, I don't know.
Great.
Rinkesh will ask you a question.
Yeah,
Hello, ma'am.
thank you. Hello.
Currently, the number of genetically modified crop is increasing. So, is it possible that it will affect the nutritious value of plant in future?
That's a fantastic question, and I don't know the answer. That's a fantastic question. I mean, one would hope that if you have a very diverse vegetarian diet, as we referred to before, you have to have it quite diverse in nuts, mushrooms, vegetables, and all that, lentils, and so on, pulses. I mean, if you have that, then hopefully that would not be a major impact. But it depends on what the gene modification is. If the gene modification doesn't affect the probiotics and the nature of the fiber within the product, but only, for example, makes it grow faster, I'm not sure that it would affect it. But really, there's often an unanticipated side effect of changing genes in cells. So you might, theoretically, put in a gene modification to say, right, it grows faster, but perhaps the finished product compared to the slower growing one is somewhat different. And that's come up in the, sort of on social media really, in relation to, wheat that's grown fast and bread that they add yeast to and that's quickly done. And it's not as good for you as the slow grown stuff. So the answer is I don't know. I think it's a brilliant question, actually. Yeah. That's a brilliant thought. I mean, I wouldn't have thought of it, but yeah. I don't know the answer though. But I suspect not, but research will be needed to show that yes, all the components. But remember, the research only sees what it looks for. And so, as I say, even if you did say, okay, the probiotics are here and the fiber is here in the gene-modified product versus the non-modified product, and it's bigger, so that's a good thing, right? But there may be other, secondary knock-on effects in the genome of the modified plant that perhaps affects its rate of absorption, or there may be something in there that we don't know about that impacts negatively on what we consider to be the positive features of that product. So I don't know the answer to that. I think that would be a nice area to research, actually.
That's your PhD project.
That's your PhD.
Not yours, Bridget. Yeah. You already have one. You can get a second of it. Yeah.
Exactly. I'm time expired.
Yeah. No.
Leave it to the young ones. Yep.
Leave it to the young ones. So thank you so much, Bridget, for that wonderful and brilliant presentation. So we have younger and older people here, and everyone present understood. You explained very clearly, and I also learned from it because I didn't know about this area at all. And now I know that having that huge diversity, having a bigger diversity of the microbiome is very healthy, and so I look forward to many nutritious vegetarian types of food.
Absolutely.
When I come back to London.
Indeed, when you come back in a couple of days. Very good. I want to. Fantastic. Well, I want to also mention that, of course, for the people who are interested, all the references for what's on the slides are in the footnotes to each slide.
Yes.
Because it's obviously all picked from the literature. So hopefully maybe some of the more detailed questions could be addressed in the actual body of literature. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to such an interactive and excellent audience, and I'd like to thank the organisers for giving me the opportunity to talk to you on this topic.
Thank you, Bridget. And just before you go, yeah, you mentioned that the references to books and papers, articles, etc., are within the slides as footnotes. But just off the top of thinking, on top of your head, having explored this and created this presentation, is there any particular book or book title that stands out that you'd like to suggest that it's a good one to read? No particular book.
I think not a book. None of these things are books. If you look at the references, all of them are available on Google Scholar. Just cut and paste the title in and you'll get them on Google Scholar and you'll get the PDF downloadable for free. The thing about fast-growing areas like, say, gene therapy and this area is that books are out of date by the time they're printed for this, because people are asking, like all the great questions we've had today, they're questions from lots of different investigators, and they're publishing all the time. So I didn't go for a review. I went for, well, there are some reviews in there, but each review has a very narrow focus in science, because you can see the questions are myriad and all are important.
Many variables.
So I wouldn't. Yes, exactly.
So no,
it's like the microbiome. Eh?
Yes, it makes sense, because absolutely. When you've been involved with book projects, giving a chapter, and me also, either creating books or editing and so on, it takes so many years just to get a finished product, and by the time it's published, everything is out of date, especially in the science world and in this world that you've been describing.
That's right.
So it's interesting that you went for the articles that are current to find where the cutting edge of the debate is. So the references are there in the slides, and I'll make sure that Mahendra Bhai, who is especially interested in this, gets a copy of the slides.
Thank you, Mahendra Bhai. Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Fantastic.
Thank you, Bridget.
Great.
Have a lovely day.
Thank you very much. Thank you all. Have a great day.
Thank you.